What's going on, everybody? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at, whenever you're watching this. We're going to be jumping into some 40K lore here today with a channel that I haven't actually checked out before. We're checking out the Primarch's Leman Russ lore, the Wolf King, Space Wolves, Warhammer 40K by Italian Spartacus. So yeah, links will be down below in the description to the original video and the Italian Spartacus channel. So please do me a favor, if you enjoy this video as we go through it, go over to his channel, be sure to give it a like, and check out the rest of the content he's got on his channel. And yeah, if you enjoy his content, hit that sub button on his channel to give him some love and support. It's a great free way to do so. And you know, by all means, check out his YouTube memberships, Patreon, any kind of sponsorship stuff he's got going on, etc. For ways to give him some extra love and support if you enjoy his content. You can do the same for my channel if you would like. There is a join button underneath the video, as well as the link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. So you can check those out if you would like to. There's also much playlists on the channel for other YouTube content videos that I've done reactions to. Warhammer 40K, the Magnus Archives have been getting into a lot lately. There's a ton of SCP universe stuff, as well as some gaming content on the channel. So feel free to look around and see if any of that would have any kind of interest for you. But yeah, let's jump into this. Again, this is going to be the Primarch's Leman Russ lore, the Wolf King, Space Wolves, Warhammer 40K by Italian Spartacus. So let's jump into this. Boop, boop.
Of all the Primarchs, I would say that Leman Russ is the one that I could tell you the story for many times over without really missing a detail. Or well, at least the old lore. Things have really progressed a lot for Leman Russ and the Space Wolves and the Wolf King himself in the most recent lore of the Horus Heresy. And the Wolf King, master of the Space Wolf Legion, has this history that is less tragic than his brothers, but far more boisterous and loud, you know, much like the Great Wolf himself. And we've covered a great deal of Traitor Primarchs, where we see their flaws become the driving force behind the wedge that pries them from the Greater Imperium. But Leman Russ stands above the struggle of his brothers to become the Primarch with an unerring dedication to the Emperor.
That's true.
In light of some of the...
That is kind of true, right? He really, like, even to the point again where he and his group basically become the executioners for the Emperor. And basically, yeah, the Emperor says do it, he does it without question.
Situations that happen in the later portion of the Horus Heresy that really cause Leman Russ to question his own motives and where he kind of stands in the Imperium. And there are a lot of times in the lore before and after the heresy where the Space Wolves will uphold what is right, quote unquote, even in the face of an inquisitorial sanction. More on that later. But let's get into the world of Fenris, of the Volca, or I guess the Volca Fenrica, the Wolves of Fenris, and the Leman Russ. So our story begins like most Primarchs on a death world, in a far-flung portion of the galaxy, far away from the Emperor's light on distance.
They even have a world just called Purgatory. Like, that must be a terrible world to actually just have it called Purgatory. So Fenris here, that's where we're getting Uralon. I'm just looking at the various themes here. Ermar. That's supposed to be Vanaheim. Oh, they're not that far from Cadia. Interesting. Yep, and there's yeah, the Eye of Terror, or what was the Eye of Terror. Interesting. Okay, Caliban.
Terra. Deep in the Segmentum Obscura, which is very close to what eventually becomes the Eye of Terror, Fenris is unlike the other worlds we've talked about so far. Fenris is almost entirely covered in snow, with small temperate islands dotted throughout the vast oceans of the planet, massive thunder wolves, black-maned wolves, Fenrisian wolves stalk the landscape along with ice bears, mastodons, and other abnormally sized woodland creatures. It's actually kind of talked about that Fenris itself is shaped like a wolf's head, and everything on Fenris itself has a lot of wolf characteristics. Even the Krakens we're about to talk about, you know, the Krakens in addition, and monstrous leviathans move unnoticed through the depths of Fenris until they are upon any hapless members of the native population. The planet's tectonic plates kind of shift every 2 or 3 times per year, creating an entirely different landscape. So this makes mapping Fenris itself near impossible, save for the northern polar continent, which remains mainly intact. You know, that's kind of where things get built up and stay the most, because things don't shift as much up there. So this is the hell in which Leman Russ crash lands on. smack dab in the middle of her Thunderwolf mother's den. There, he was raised by the She-Wolf, who, I mean, obviously sensed the feral energy of the nascent Primarch. So, it's worth noting that a Thunderwolf is a version of the apex predator version of a Fenrisian wolf. It's the most, the largest, like a timber wolf. Think of it like a timber wolf in our timeline, which are now extinct. But Thunderwolf is the biggest,
the direst wolves,
terrifying and
the direst of dire wolves.
This happen a lot in the story of the Primarchs, where their stories parallel certain origin or mythological stories in our own times.
Right.
Leman Russ's early childhood is very similar to Romulan and Remus, raised by Romulus and Remus. Romulan, that's a Star Trek reference.
Right.
But
that's where my mind went when he said Romulan and Remus. Is like, oh, so like, yeah, the whole night and day thing. Romulans were, yeah, I got it.
It's by a massive she-wolf. And this is true for a number of prolific figures in their own respective mythos of being raised by wolves. I mean, it's still sort of insult to people regarding their feral behavior. But of course, for Leman Russ, that's quite the compliment. So eventually, Leman Russ's wolf family was discovered by a group of kind of hunting party natives, I guess, a hunting party of natives who attacked the pack on sight, killing the wolf mother and the majority of the wolf pack save 2. Now, Russ went into a rampage, slaughtering over a dozen warriors with his bare hands. And this was the moment when the natives discovered that Leman Russ, or Russ, was actually
more than just a normal human.
Attacking. The last 2 wolves, Freki and Gary, joined Russ and the natives in returning to King Thengir of the Russ tribe's camp. Gary's kind of a very unassuming and really not a cool name for a wolf, but I'm going to go with it. Actually, probably pronounced like Jerry or something like that. I have no idea. But this story goes as it does for most of our Primarchs, right? Russ quickly devoured all knowledge presented to him, learning to eloquently speak Low Gothic, the vernacular of Fenris, becoming a masterful warrior, hunter, and tribesman. Thengir knew that the boy was destined for greatness, and really granted him a true name, Leman of the...
I mean, it would be hard not to, right? That's kind of like how it went with all the Primarchs, right? Like all the Primarchs, even as a kid, I think they grew faster than any normal person and matured than any normal human does. But I mean, just their physical prowess alone, even as a child, would be greater than the average man would be, probably even greater than the average Astartes would be. So it's like, yeah, they're going to stand out, right? Even see human faces in random patterns, Fenrisian see wolves instead. Gotcha.
Russ, hence where we get Leman Russ from. And Russ went on to claim victory in a number of prominent duels against the champion of the King's Guard and became a leader amongst the Russ tribe itself, all the while with his 2 wolfkin in tow. Now, when King Thengir eventually died of old age, much to the thanks of Russ's thousands of victories against the other tribes, the mantle of leadership passed on to the Primarch. Thus is the legacy of the Wolf King of Fenris born. And the early reign of Russ is really filled with a ton of hyperbole, as befits the legion who closely falls in line with Nordic backgrounds.
No, I get you. I get
In addition,
you.
They have a long-running tradition of word of mouth as a way to keep track of their history, or oral history, as we all know, versus written history, or oral sex, which we all know. Wait, what? So we have these
Excuse you?
sweeping tales of Russ, toppling mastodons with a mere hip check, defeating entire armies without a scratch single-handedly, tear whole trees out from the ground. All these kind of big...
Well, I mean, and the thing is, right, like, he might actually have been able to do that. I mean, like, that's, part of the Norse custom back in the day, from my understanding, and correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, but they would embellish stories like that to make themselves look better and more heroic, etc. But, knowing what the Primarchs are capable of, if you were to sit there and tell me, yeah, Leman Russ kind of went up and shoulder checked a mastodon and it just fell over and died, I'd be like, well, that's about right.
Big, huge, sweeping stories, all manner of stories that actually really might not be entirely crazy. I mean, Russ was basically hopped up on cosmic genetic Russian steroids, and you can't spell Russian without Russ. So I'm not sure how crazy these stories are. Also, he's the embodiment of Norse badassery in Warhammer. I mean, so take that as you will, with a fist of fucking thunder. Now, anyway, Russ becomes the Wolf King of the entire planet, ruling over all tribes of men. And the Emperor undoubtedly hears about this man who has taken over a planet and rightfully assumes it's one of his wayward sons. Now, here's something
Of
I have
course.
never truly appreciated about the lore of these legions, or even really understood. A lot of the Primarchs are, sent to far-flung planets that are now feudal or tribal or outright primal, and that there is no connection to the greater Imperium, or really any sort of interstellar communication or travel whatsoever. So how does the Emperor, quote-unquote, hear of this? I mean, you could make the argument.
I mean, I feel like a lot of that would probably just be like psychic, stuff. Him floating through like the astral sea or the warp or whatever you want to call it. As is described in some other books and things like that. But I would assume there are times where the Emperor probably is legitimately just like actually actively looking for, these Primarchs. They are great tools for him, besides just, him considering them potentially his children. And he would want to retrieve them because they are a massive part of his plan.
That it is all down to psychic connection with his sons, but it's something I've always really wondered about, because the Index Astartes definitely makes it sound like it's rumors that spread. Like, oh, did you hear hearsay about the Wolfman going and conquering Fenris? And Emperor going, hey man, the fuck's Fenris? I don't know where that is. But the only other Primarch who actually reaches out directly to the Emperor himself
Magnus,
is Magnus.
right? Yeah.
We've talked about that before, how Magnus and the Emperor had a rapport before even they actually met in person. So I always kind of wondered how they were drawn to each other. In some origin stories, it talks about how the Emperor is actually physically and psychically drawn towards his sons. And other times they kind of make it out to be like, he got like a Twitter update that's like hashtag Wolf King. And he's like, I'm going to go.
No kidding, right?
So, back on track. So Russ enjoys this pretty great time ruling over now the majority of Fenris. And there's a few errant clans here and there, but nothing really overwhelming. The Emperor makes way for Fenris and really kind of disguises himself as a cloaked traveler, wandering from town to town. And he knew he had to destroy the soul stone of Diablo. Wait, whoa, sorry.
Okay, I got you. I see where he's going. I saw where he was going. I was picking up what he was putting down there. Little Diablo lore going in there. Man after my own heart. Great games. Although Diablo 4 is a little bit. Anyway, that's a whole other topic.
Headphones. Anyway, the Emperor goes to the Wolf King's Great Hall and challenges Russ to his face in front of all of his retainers at the mighty Wolf Throne. And if the stranger won, he would be given the privilege of drinking at the right hand of Russ during the feast. If Russ won, then the Emperor would serve him for an entire year. Now, agreeing, the two went to their grand challenge, which was in 3 parts, kind of broken up as it were. Their first challenge was
like a drinking contest. I know there's a drinking contest, and maybe there's an eating contest, I think. I don't remember what the third was. And I could be wrong about the eating contest, but I definitely know there's some drinking involved.
An eating contest, because, after all, they're at a massive feast. And the Emperor went to town and ran a train on some Fenrisian chicken wings, eating more than most men at the banquet. And as he went to reach for more food, he discovered that Russ had eaten everything, eaten the whole entire hall out of its food stuff. So Russ won, Emperor 0. The second challenge was a drinking contest. The Emperor summoned up his frat days and did a cosmic beer bong, the likes that had not been seen, chugging through 6 whole barrels of Fenrisian mead. And reaching for his 7th, he again discovered that Russ had finished the entire feast's alcohol reserve. So Russ 2, Emperor, a big...
Then wasn't the third one, wasn't it just like straight up they came to blows, right? They actually like fought?
Fat 0. So this incensed the Emperor, and to be honest, it should have made way more people mad. And what seems like the span of an hour, 2 dudes ate the entire food and alcohol stuff, or what was supposed to be a grand party. So, some celebration this was. Leman, real dude. Either way, the Wanderer forsakes Russ's attitude, kind of calling him a number of pointed curses such as drunkard, low credit score lout, and glutton, and essentially challenging his legacy as someone with the inability to actually accomplish really fucking anything. You're just here to drink and eat. You don't really do anything, Leman Russ. So it kind of goads the Wolf King, and Russ spoke over the hush court that the third challenge was to be a duel. Now, in the quote-unquote old lore, that was all that happened. The Emperor challenged Russ, and they fought, and that was it. In the updated lore, this sort of Norse-style story is crafted between these two, as is told in many songs of our own history, right? We get these grand sweeping tales about Beowulf and how he accomplished things in many, many, many stages and feats, or Hercules, or even Superman, but whatever. My point is that they expand and flesh out this lore to be a little bit more wide sweeping. But the Emperor throws back his cloak, revealing himself as the actual Emperor, no longer just this wanderer. And he's covered in golden power armor and wielding a massive power glove. And the duel was over almost before it started. I mean, he used the colossal gauntlet to break Russ. And after Leman came to, he declared his fealty to the Emperor of Mankind, and thus the Space Wolves were born. So joining up with the 6th Legion, renamed thusly the Space Wolves, as we've mentioned, Leman Russ stayed under the tutelage of the Emperor for a number of weeks.
That's always something to me, too, that, like, I mean, I guess a lot of the Primarchs wouldn't really have a choice. But, like, just imagine, you know, being a Primarch, you've been raised, born, whatever, on some foreign planet, and you've made essentially your own family, friends, bonds, you know, with other soldiers, warriors, etc. And then the Emperor comes in and is basically like, here's this legion of guys that you don't know at all, and you need to go lead them and go out in space and conquer everything in my name. You know, like, that would be just a strange position to be put in, right? Like, granted, then eventually a lot of the Primarchs, like people that they knew, raised with, you know, obviously with the exception of like Angron, they would get the chance to go through the Astartes, you know, process of training and, you know, getting the gene seeds and all that stuff implanted in them and yada yada. But, you know, it's not a guaranteed thing that people would actually be able to get through that, would actually be able to survive that. Season Reasonable asks, commonly speaking, I mean, yeah, it's a pretty big ask, you know, it's a pretty big ask to, like, now I'm responsible for all these people that I don't know of. Not only am I responsible for all these people that I don't know of, they've been made from my own DNA. They're basically other versions of me, technically, and they might not necessarily be clones exactly, but they're still derived from your DNA and blood. So, like, at some point, like, you would probably feel some kind of responsibility for them, but on the other hand, it's like, yeah, it's a pretty big ask. Honestly, it's a pretty big ask. It's like, hey, by the way, I actually made you. You're my son. And then not only that, I've got this whole legion here for you. And it's time for you to go out into the universe and wage war and start conquering worlds in my name. And any of those worlds that don't submit peacefully, you need to show them what's up, kind of a thing, you know? So it's like, I don't know. It would be a very, very strange position to be put in. And the thing is, too, is like, you're also in a situation where you can't really say no. Because the Emperor is far more powerful, capable, intelligent than you are. And, like, what are you going to do? What are you going to do if you say no? You know what I mean? Like, there is no. There just isn't. The choice has been taken from you. So, yeah, I don't know. It's kind of a shitty position we put in.
And the 6th Legion had been implanted with the Canis Helix, the gene seed of the Space Wolves, bearing the traits and values that Leman Russ exhibited. So you're going to have a whole entire, I almost said race, chapter or legion of wolfmen, basically, with long hair, varying shades of color, red, brown, white, gray, blonde.
And to continue, sorry, my brain was, you know, continuing on that discussion. There are even some situations like with Magnus's men where they go through the Astartes process of the gene seed implementation and they start having mutations. Even a lot of Russ's men that turn into actual like wolf mutants, and then they're shunned by the Imperium themselves. You know what I mean? So it's like, now not only do you have these responsibilities, but some of the people that you cared about now have gone through these mutations and are basically like outcasts when they had, you know, potentially a good life, good standing beforehand. You know, like, yeah, I don't know, just a shitty kind of unfair situation we put in. Yeah, that's why the Primarch programming that makes them, most of them accept willingly, feeling like it's what they were meant for. Yeah. Yep.
Everyone's got these very long fangs, and as they get older, the fangs still grow in size. That's what they call the older Marines of the Space Wolves chapter, the long fangs, because they are the most senior, aside from, of course, the Wolf Guard and the Wolf Lords.
Well, and again, from his perspective, like, he made them with this sole purpose, and if he and Malkador were able to raise them probably like he had planned, then yeah, they would have gone through the proper training and quote unquote programming, and a lot of this would have turned out differently. They would have been raised from the beginning with the idea that these Astartes are going to be their legions to lead, and they have this great purpose to go out and, you know, conquer the galaxy in the name of the Imperium, and, you know, spread the light of humanity, etc., etc. But because of what Chaos did and spread them amongst the stars, that's not what happened, you know?
Themselves. So, and in addition to that, every single one of the Space Wolves has enhanced hearing, enhanced smell. In a lot of the books, they talk about how they can smell the enemy coming, or they can smell certain situations that are about to unfold, like the tension between two opposing parties. And it kind of makes the Space Wolves like a step above. Whenever you read the lore, you're like, Jesus Christ, these guys are kind of like badasses in the sense that they can smell things coming around the corner.
Supernatural senses.
They can hear things acutely well, and their howl, like the Leman Russ's howls, is suspected to be kind of like a psychic scream a little bit. But they're a little bit of a cut above normal Space Marines, to be totally honest, and they have like a predatory sense too. So they're very much, well, I mean, as you would expect, Connie's.
Well, and it also, I think it was the Arbiter Ian video we watched, like, it also has to do with the world they were like raised on, right? Like, the world is so harsh and unforgiving that to survive, it's literally the survival of the fittest. So only the strongest would make it. And then because of the fact that their bodies and their minds are so conditioned that the Astartes process, you know, implementation of the gene seed, etc., enhances them even further. And I think they were even able, they had like the least amount of negative impacts from it, right? The least amount of deaths, the least amount of like rejection, etc. I think like more of the people that were born on Fenris that went through the Astartes project or process, whatever you want to call it, they had greater success than a lot of other chapters did, right? Or legions, whatever.
Helix, they're very wolf-like. In addition to that, they have a curse of the Wolfen, just like we see with the Blood Angels who have the red thirst. The curse of the Wolfen turns them into essentially werewolves.
Right.
And this is kind of rooted out in the early processes of becoming a Space Wolf when you're in a neophyte cadet type stages. It gets rid of that. Doesn't get rid of the curse. It roots out who has been affixed by the cursed, and then basically they root them out from the chapter itself. So we've talked about a number of issues that most Primarchs.
And yeah, imagine that. Imagine, you know, wanting to serve, you know, your Primarch, but you can't because you've got this, you know, curse in your blood now. Like, that's gotta suck. And then again, like, you're kind of become almost like an outcast, right?
Primarch's face during this time of, you know, coming into the fold. Either the Primarch railing against the pre-established structure or outright changing everything. And this might be fleshed out more as more books about Russ during the Horus Heresy come to light. But Leman has really little trouble acclimating to his legion as they do him. I mean, furthermore, he's granted leave to work on his own for the Great Crusade in only a matter of weeks, which versus most Primarchs spending more time under the Emperor. I mean, the early reforging the Legion was in part due to the success of Russ's veterans. And Russ himself is the second Primarch to be found alongside Ferrus Manus. I mean, you have the Horus come first, and then Russ and Ferrus Manus.
Or was Alfarius actually the first one found?
Essentially happen around the same time. I'm just going to throw a word out there and say it's around the same year, but they come into the fold around the same time. But not all the Primarchs, but a good portion of them took a select few into the new legion with them, typically kind of giving them a name as befitting the legacy of their adopted homeworld. Like the Night Lords have the Atramentar. That's their big like elite unit that has kind of derived something from their homeworld. The Fire Drakes for the Salamander is named after the gigantic Fire Drakes of the Salamander's homeworld. But the Space Wolves had the Veragir Wolf Guard, or the Varangi. And
the Varangi,
not to be confused with the Ferengi, that this is not a second Star Trek reference.
Yes, very different.
The oath-sworn men of Fenris that followed Russ into space, taking the Indicanius Helix despite their age. And just surprisingly, a large number of them actually made it all the way to full-blown Astartes, which is quite rare for anyone not inducted in their kind of teens or early 20s. And this sort of speaks to the ferocious resilience of the Space Wolves that permeates the Legion. I mean, Russ then disseminated these guys across the entire Legion, helping to lead and guide the 6th Legion. This didn't really go over well initially. The 6th Legion was as prideful as their Liege Lord was, so you can imagine how they hate being told what to do. And a lot of these initial Veragir Guard actually form up what's called the 13th Company, and the 13th Great Company. And we're going to go into them a little bit more later in this video, but we're going to give them their own video. They definitely do deserve their own video. So these Varangi, they basically kind of make up a lot of the leaders and a lot of the other personnel that are important to each and every chapter or great company is what they're actually called in the Space Wolf Legion, and they help kind of lead from the front. Now, the fledgling Legion took to their stars on their first campaign, the Wheel of Fire. And you have to remember, at this time, there are only 3 total Primarchs that we've discussed, right? We've been discovered Horus, Ferris, Minus, and Leman Russ, like we just mentioned a little bit ago. So there's not a lot of supporting Primarchs or overlapping campaigns like we see towards the end of the Great Crusade. The entire 6th Legion heads for the Wheel of Fire, a subsector of the eastern portion of the galaxy. And there, the Space Wolves clash headlong with the massive Orc Empire of Charadon. Greenskins in the billions fight against the Wolf Brothers of Russ. And this is really a massive campaign, and really it's extremely pivotal. You have the Legionnaires of the 6th, who are untested in Russ's eyes, all of them being born mainly from Terra, and being led by the Veragir Guard, who are tested but don't know the technology at the time.
Right.
The ultimate result.
Right. That is an interesting kind of conundrum, right? So, like, Russ has to lead, a group of soldiers that he's untested with commanding. They don't know his command style or who he is. And they're also being led by other soldiers that are directly from Russ and Fenris, who know Russ more, but they don't know the power armor, the technology, and all the things like that. So they're untrained with that, or at least not as trained, I guess, would be the proper way to say it. And they're having to purge the world with billions of orcs. So yeah, this would be quite the undertaking for a first major campaign.
Is a divided legion that teaches its strengths to the other portion, coming out as a stronger and fiercer legion for it. And although the campaign sees a third of the total Space Wolf Legion being destroyed, it's ultimately deemed a success. This also sets the pace for why the Space Wolves are one of these smaller legions, that and always throwing themselves on the far end of the frontier at any chance they get. But the Emperor gifts Russ with the Spear of Russ, and the Fang is built on Fenris to commemorate the momentous occasion. The Emperor cuts red tape with gigantic golden power scissors. It's a great goddamn time. There's champagne. It's awesome. The Mechanicus is wild. They're taking their robes off. But moving on, there's 2 events that we've talked about already, but they're worth bringing up. The Night of the Wolf, where Angron and Russ fight, and this is over the Butcher's Nails that Leman Russ is told Angron to stop using. It's a sanction from the Emperor himself. And this results in a pretty big stain upon both legions' honor and pride. This is where Russ breaks his famed chainsword Krakenmaw and is granted Mjolnir, the massive 2-handed frost sword. I guess
Mjolnir the sword, huh? I wonder where the name of that comes from. I wonder where that comes from.
Worth mentioning, in total, Russ has like 4 weapons. Mjolnir, his frost sword, the Spear of Russ, the Axe of Hellwinter, which is a frost axe crafted from kraken teeth, and then lastly, Scorn Spitter, a bolt pistol modified and crafted by Vulcan himself. So he's not really hurting for weapons here. And we see him like swapping these interchangeably throughout the Horus Heresy and everything.
This is just Frostmourne. I'm sorry. This is just Frostmourne. It really is. The story looks exactly like Frostmourne, in my opinion. Anyway.
But then there's the other incident where Lionel Johnson
never heard of it, yeah.
Leman Russ over a perceived slight when they were bringing a world back into Imperial compliance. This spawns the great feud between the Dark Angels and the Space Wolves, where they have a champion of each one's respective chapter fight once a year in the current era. Now, there's a bit of a retcon nowadays. During that initial fight, it said that Lionel Johnson punched Leman Russ so hard that it killed one of his hearts. It destroyed one of his hearts.
Jesus.
In Wolfsbane, we see that that's a different result. So for those of you that have read Wolfsbane, I'm just going to tip my fedora to that. But both of those stories are covered in depth in their respective Primarchs video. So I'll let you dive into those. But there's another thing I want to get into, and by respective video, I mean the Angren video covers the Night of the Wolf. The Lionel Johnson video covers what happens between Lionel Johnson and Leman Russ. So you can jump onto those videos to kind of hear a little bit more about them. But I want to get into something that plays heavily into the Night of the Wolf. And sometime between Leman's rediscovery and the Horus Heresy, that handful of hundreds of years, Russ earns the title the Emperor's Executioner.
Yeah.
And we know of 20 total Primarchs that came from the Emperor's Primarch experiment and out into the void. And 2 of those are shrouded in absolute mystery. And
they've disappeared.
Until recently that we're starting to hear more and more about them. In the earlier days, the 2 were wiped from the Imperial records, suspected to have been corrupted upon contact or lost to the warp. And that was it. You had entries in the rule book that just said it, and you moved on from there. But it's supposed to kind of create this illusion that, okay, there's these 2 legions that don't exist, but you, the hobbyist, can create.
I mean, yeah, I think Games Workshop made that lore so that you could use that as the way to create your own Primarch and your own legion on the tabletop if you wanted to. But lore-wise, it's still kind of been really shrouded in mystery, and it's been, I guess, suspected that something happened and Russ and the Space Wolves got sent to deal with them. And that's how they got the title of the Emperor's Executioners.
Whatever chapters or
that plus, what happened on Prospero.
Legions or origin stories you want to create, and you can use the 19th and the 2nd Legion as your kind of starting off point, if you so wish. So that was the original intention. In the current Horus Heresy series, we know that the 2 legions were actually officially sanctioned and eventually killed, and they're referred to as the Forgotten and the Purged, which I'm not on.
Now, from what I understand too, I think there's supposed to be an excerpt from some book or something somewhere with one of the custodians mentioning that there might be some kind of something. One of the redacted Primarchs potentially might be imprisoned on Terra under, the word's escaping my brain. It's not, my brain's wanting to say under the Golden Throne, but that's not it. But it's under the palace, I think. And that there's something underneath there that has been referenced, and it could be maybe one of the Primarchs. They've got imprisoned there for something, you know what I'm saying? So who knows? They might do something with that.
I'm honestly not sure if that means one is forgotten in a literal sense of saying not saying oh, I forgot my fucking car keys. I mean they're forgotten as in, hey, these guys are intentionally forgotten. Let's not bring them up ever again. And one was purged, or the title of both of them. So I'm not sure if it's supposed to imply that the purged was killed, the forgotten was found and decided, oh, this is too corrupt, we have to kill it off. Or the title for both of them is Forgotten and Purged. So there aren't a ton of details on this, and it's worth expanding upon on its own video. So we know a scant number of facts that derived some semblance of truth around this mystery. But if you want to hear more, do let me know. I can do a whole new video on that. It's starting to develop more and more as these books come out. So it's a pretty hot button topic right now that's constantly changing. But Russ himself admits that he's familiar with fighting other Space Marines. Dorn remarks that he's afraid of another empty Primarch statue in the Emperor's palace. Even Sanguinius is afraid to talk about the Red Thirst for fear of it kind of being the Blood Angels themselves being the 3rd Legion to be purged. And a lot of people then sort of band-aid words at Russ, asking if he'll be sent to censure them and the such, like almost like a threat, like, oh, what are you gonna do, Russ? Are you gonna come over here and kill us? Is basically the kind of attitude that they give him. And a lot of the ways they kind of start to mention these forgotten legions in the books, and they're quickly, hey, no, we're not supposed to talk about that. We're under oath not to talk about that. So I'm assuming that as we get to the last book, or the last handful of books, Horus and the Emperor will have a conversation that sheds light on what those two legions were about. But until then, we have not much to go on. So there's a lot of speculation.
I don't think that ended up happening.
And again, if you'd like to,
but I'm far behind on the books.
Just let me know in the comments below, as always, guys. But as a whole, the Space Wolves were a very successful legion. They pushed out to the deep fringes of the galaxy to spread the Emperor's light like a smooth sheen of butter on finely toasted bread.
Okay.
But when the Horus Heresy finally broke out, Leman Russ was truly out too far to be really much aid, and that was Horus's plan, really.
Yep.
Attack when the legions were furthest from each other and information could not be reliably
Horus was smart.
Just mass confusion. We see this with the Dark Angels. He pulls the Ultramarines back into the Ultima Segmentum to kind of fragment them apart as well, and this is his grand stroke. And this doesn't mean that the Space Wolves were absent from the events from the Heresy. Far from it. One of the biggest and earliest moves in the Heresy, even before the Drop Site Massacre, is the grand burning of Prospero.
Yep.
And we know the tale of how Magnus the Red, the Primarch of the Thousand Suns, reached through the veil to contact his emperor. And in doing so, he broke the wards on the webway and of Terra, Holy Terra itself. This allowed...
Yeah. I mean, I said it in the Magnus video I did from the Amber King, right? Which, quick little plug, if you want to check that out, there's a video that I did on Magnus the Red from the Amber King. It's actually a 3-parter that I also put together in a longer video. But I mean, in my opinion, after going through that, Magnus is just as responsible for a lot of the stuff that happened in the Heresy as anyone else. His pride and his ego and his unwillingness to actually listen, and him thinking he could do no wrong and he was always right, and then the fact that all he really had to do when the Space Wolves were going to Prospero, all he really had to do was surrender. All I had to do was send out a message saying, hey man, I give up, take me in chains back to the Emperor, I will face my consequences, leave my planet and people alone. And Russ probably would have done that, you know what I'm saying? But yeah.
Demons to kind of pour forth and in and out of the webway into the actual throne room of Terra. This royally pisses off the Emperor. And not only did Magnus jeopardize the Emperor's plan of breaching the Black Library, but he also broke the creed set out by the Council of Nicaea. Whatever, but Nicaea, which banned the use of sorcery and psychic.
And I mean, he also made Terra vulnerable to demon incursions
in the Imperium as a whole. Now, having no choice, he sent Leman Russ to Prospero to bring Magnus back to Terra to kind of answer for his transgressions. And Leman Russ wasn't really a huge fan of Magnus to begin with, as the Space Wolves stood staunchly, as I would say, against the Thousand Suns during the Council of Nicaea, advocating against.
They were not against the Psychers. Yep, they did not like Psychers.
Mortarion and the such, who was saying, "Hey, we can't have sorcery in our legions. It's gonna rot our brains. Those damn kids and their Grand Theft Auto." But in fact, Russ went so far as to say psychic warfare and the means by which the Thousand Suns conduct warfare is overly dishonorable, and the combat should be met, and that combat itself should be met with blade and fang and not sleight of hand and tricks. And this, of course, overly ironic because the rune priests and the wolf priests,
they're basically psychers.
Basically all soothsayers and shamans.
Yeah.
In fact, the entire culture of the Space Wolves is heavily tied to its shamanistic and ritualistic beliefs. So I guess that's neither here nor there, I suppose, but it's always kind of a weird dichotomy that the Space Wolves don't want anything to do with, the Vyrd, as they call it, WYRD, or the warp science, or not science, warp sorcery, or anything of the sort. Yet their rune priests command like the abilities of lightning, very much in the same way that the White Scars have the commands of like the elements. So it's a very weird like shamanistic thing that is quite clearly warp sorcery that they're like, no, that's just the Vyrd. We're good. We got this. But again, back on track here. En route to Prospero, Horus intercepted Russ and told him of many more atrocities that Magnus had undergone, and essentially kind of striking a bigger flame of fury in the Wolf King, enraging him. And Horus's parting message to Russ is that the Emperor amended his previous order, and that the new one was to launch a full-scale planetary assault on Magnus and the Thousand Suns, purging another Primarch. The incensed wolf was only too happy to oblige as they entered the system of the Thousand Suns. And a combined force of the entire Space Wolves Legion, which I think was, I had read somewhere, it's like the Thousand Suns had numbered somewhere from like 60 or 70,000 Marines, and the Space Wolves had been a little bit larger. I think it was like either 90 or to 110. I can't remember the actual numbers. And those numbers are very, very like in flux. So again, don't quote me on any of that, because it just depends on which book you're reading, because the older books say, oh, there was 4,000. So
right.
That's my point. Either way, entire Space Wolves
Games Workshop doing their retconning as they do.
Legion, Imperial Guard Detachment, and the Sisters of Silence fell upon the world of Prospero. And for all their guile and wisdom and psychic abilities and forethought, the Thousand Suns could not resist the unquenched fury of the Space Wolves as they threw themselves upon the planet's defenses, breaking through ward after ward. And it said that the 13th Great Company was the one that actually led the charge here. They're using their Wolfen, their Curse of the Wolfen, to really break through a lot of the initial wards that the Thousand Suns had set up, using that kind of bestial ferocity to kind of push the line ever onward, right over up until, Magnus's door. And after endless orbital bombardments and ground attacks, the Space Wolves fought bitterly with brothers about the ruins of the cities until Primarch met Primarch.
Yep.
Magnus used his psychic abilities to bolster his strength during his duel with Russ, which made the Wolf King only angrier. Hefting the red giant above his head,
Broke his
Russ
back.
brought Magnus down on his knee in a WWE Pro Wrestling backbreaker move.
Yep.
And as Magnus tumbled from the Lord of Wolves' leg, Russ undoubtedly let out a large woo and a cheesy wolf wrestling slogan like, "Good
Very
luck
much did the
chasing
Ric
your
Flair.
tail, Magnus." Fuck, that was bad. Okay, I'm moving on from that one too. Jesus. So after the back break, Magnus makes his deal with Tzeentch, stealing himself and the rest of his legion away. And there's going to be a digression here. At one point...
Which, I mean, he was already in collusion with Tzeentch, even though he technically didn't really know, but he did know. But yeah, Magnus was already messing with things that he shouldn't have been.
The lore says that the 13th Great Company pursued the Thousand Suns into the warp, following them to kind of wreak havoc on them. I'm going to go with a later theory that comes in a little bit, but I want to put that as a little footnote there. So this is not the only engagement the Space Wolves are involved in. After Prospero, the Legion goes to muster in Alexis and the Alexis Nebula, regathering and licking their wounds, and no pun intended there, shit. But you have this completely battered Legion that has suffered massive losses in the name of another quote.
I mean, that's one of the things about, Horus that you got to give him credit for. He was smart in how he did this. He made the Space Wolves and the Thousand Suns fight each other. So, because Magnus wasn't making a decision one way or the other, they were basically, for all intents and purposes, kind of wiped out. And then the Space Wolves were left weakened. He did what he did with the Space Marines, and he sent, the Dark Angels out, I believe, to like the farthest reaches, so they really couldn't get back and help. The White Scars didn't really know one way or the other where to go, what the truth was, what wasn't the truth. He sowed a lot of confusion against the other legions that weren't directly, allied with him. And, even the Adeptus Mechanicus, ended up falling under Horus's, I guess rule. That's not the word I was looking for, but his collusions, giving them, telling them that they could take a look at all the various, secrets and dark powers and things that were locked away in various vaults that they were told not to look at, and all those kind of temptations if they were to follow him and ally with him over the Emperor, etc. So I mean, like, he was smart. Horus was smart in everything he did.
Unquote victory that is then beset upon another enemy. The Alpha Legion has had been launched by Horus to really clean up the victor of the burning of Prospero. The burning of Prospero was meant to push Magnus into becoming a disciple of chaos.
Right.
We actually see by the White Scars book and stuff like that, that Magnus is not so much like oh, okay, well, I'm pissed now. Now I'm all for chaos. He actually spends a great deal of time on the planet of sorcerers, which is where he eventually ends, kind of saying to himself, like, what the hell do I do now? I don't trust Magnus. I don't trust Horus. The Emperor has forsaken me. I'm still ultimately loyal to the Imperial way, but I've just been kind of cast aside. So it's a very interesting scenario. I mean, the Thousand Sons, for the most part, sit out the remainder of the Horus heresy. But this massive fleet fell upon the Space Wolves, engaging them as they poured out of the warp, one at a time. And Jagatai Khan of the White Scars had gone to Prospero to see what had happened with his own eyes. So he was in the system as well. And this is a pretty kind of scary point for Jagatai, because he doesn't know who's a traitor and who's an enemy. So the Space Wolves called for aid, but the White Scars were still really unsure, right, of who was actually a loyalist and who was a traitor. So he took leave of the scenario, wishing Russ best of luck. Which, I mean, this is just very unbrotherly and kind of dickish if you think about it. But alone,
I mean, it is, but at the same time, right, you from his perspective, again, like, he doesn't know who's a good guy and who's a bad guy. So it's like, sometimes inaction in those kind of scenarios might be the best course of action, right? Like, what happens if Leman Russ was actually bad and Alfarius, you know, was actually still loyal to the Emperor, and they joined up and went after Russ, and then it turned out, oh, whoops, it's actually the other way around. Russ was still loyal to the Emperor, and he was just duped by Horus, and you know, the Alpha Legion were the bad guys all around. Now you just, you know, wiped out one of the loyal legions. He helped Horus, and more than likely Alfarius and his crew are going to turn against you, etc. You know what I mean? So it's like, sometimes in those scenarios, inaction and trying to really figure out what's going on is the best course of action. Yeah, oops, exactly. Oops, my bad. I just killed this whole legion and my brother Primarch. My bad.
The Space Wolves had to fend off this massive fleet of the Alpha Legion. Despondent, trapped, and feeling abandoned, Russ left the fight in the hands of his first captain, Gunnar Gunhilt, leaving for his personal
Gunnar Gunhilt, that's a name.
The engagement was brutal, reaping a massive tally on the Space Wolves. Russ was finally roused from his melancholic stupor by Bjorn One-Handed, soon to be the Fell-Handed that we all know today, who helped him come to terms
with Bjorn Ironside
executioner title. I mean, Russ kind of really, this is the tragedy of Russ, I guess you could say. He has this unflinching loyalty to the Emperor, to his father. And his dad the Emperor puts a pretty heavy burden on his shoulders. Go kill your brother. Go kill your brother again. Hey, go kill your brother a third time. And
their legions
clearly weighing on him. I mean, he's basically he won the battle, lost the war for Prospero itself. He ended up killing, well,
and I mean, the thing is, though, too, again, you look at it from Russ's perspective. He's been told to purge these other Primarchs and their legions. Now he had to do it a third time. And his reward for doing it a third time was being betrayed. From his perspective, right? He got betrayed, and now he's fighting against the Alpha Legion, another legion and another brother Primarch that he has to fight against, right? Like, yeah, it'd be kind of shitty. You just spent all this time and effort purging the Thousand Sons and breaking the back of Magnus, essentially to only have him escape, to then have to now, you know, after your legion's been bloodied, deal with getting ambushed by the Alpha Legion and another Primarch, and having to try to fight for your life through that, and watching more of your brothers being killed in battle. Like, yeah, that's going to be a rough one.
Banishing or his brother forsaken into the nether, just disappears. But he bemoans his position as this kind of mindless weapon of the Emperor versus someone who can sit there and say, Dad, no. Dad, no.
I mean, yeah. It would honestly, at that point, who wouldn't question themselves at that point too, right? Like, Was what I did actually, like, did the Emperor really tell me to do that? Is the Emperor wanting me destroyed here too? Did I do something wrong because they're sent at, you know? Or, you know, what is happening? I mean, again, you know, in the moment, his mind might not necessarily be clear, but obviously the orders came from Horus. So, you know, did Horus betray him? You know, like, you know, any number of thoughts could have gone through his head at that time. And yeah, it would be a pretty rough position to be put in.
No, I'm not going to do. I'm going to play my own music in the garage. No, he kind of reasons with himself like I should be the one questioning the Emperor's motives when he wants me to purge an entire legion here. So, not necessarily question him in a way that is, I don't trust you, Emperor, but in a way of like, I have to give the Emperor counsel. I can't just say yes blindly.
Right.
Basically is what I'm trying to say here.
Don't just blindly follow the orders.
And decides, okay, I'm never going to be a blind weapon ever again. And this kind of enables him to rouse up and kind of rally here. And this caused a shockwave across the entire Space Wolf fleet. It created this huge rallying cry as Russ kind of returns to the bridge of the Hrafnkel, the flagship of the fleet. And as the battle raged on, a unit of Lernian, I could have edited that out, but I promise it would have been just as bad every time I did it. Lernian Terminators from the Alpha Legion teleported aboard the flagship and made contact with Russ. So he's kind of stuck in this bitter bitter melee with the elite of the Alpha Legion's Cataphracti Terminators. In the last moments, kind of before victory seemed certain for the Alpha Legion, the Wolves were saved by a very unlikely ally. The Dark Angel Starfort, the Chimera, leading a large Legion fleet, turned the tides for the Wolves. And winning the day, the Chapter Master Alphalos and Leman Russ convened on the Starfort to talk about the current situation. So, the Dark Angels had been sent out by Luther 60 some odd years before the heresy to conquer more systems. And this is the first time...
There we go, getting timey-wimey here.
And Russ is hearing both of Luther's corruption and the heresy as a whole. You know, the Dropsite Massacre is now fully in effect. And he knows now that Horus is a complete and utter traitor. So
yeah, so now the picture clears from him. He knows that it wasn't the Emperor who really was telling him to wipe out. It was Horus that, you know, corrupted the Emperor's orders. So
both individuals are at a very interesting intersection because Alphalos, who is essentially not beholden or loyal to Luther, now has to go back and find out what the hell is going on. So he has to bring his entire massive fleet back to Caliban to discover what's going on. So Alphalos decides to head to Caliban with his fleet and try and find the Legion. But this is where we get a lot of those really weird discrepancies here. In the old lore, the Fenris is still just too far out from Terra to really do anything, and he's just kind of... that's the footnote at the end of the Horus Heresy. Like, okay, the Horus Heresy ends. Too bad, so sad. Space Wolves couldn't make it. In the new Horus Heresy books, Leman Russ returns to Terra with all of his, what's it called? All of his legion, and he kind of waits. He's trying to find out how to strike back at Horus. He needs to do something about Horus, and there is a book that talks about the kind of invasion into the vengeful spirit, the flagship of Horus himself, to find out the weaknesses and everything like that. And you get Garviel Loken, who's going through the whole thing. Garviel's from the first 3 books of the Horus Heresy series, and he kind of maps it out to give to
my man
Russ
Loken
to infiltrate. And in the most recent lore, we know that Russ and Horus have a huge clash in the book Wolfsbane. And since it's relatively newly released, I think it's like we're on book 50 and it's book 48 or 49, or it might actually be 47. But since it's newly released, I don't want to go into spoilers of the book. It's needless to say, though, that Russ clearly doesn't win the engagement.
I think this video we're watching is like 7 years old now, so newly released, according to this, is quite a while ago.
But he loses a huge amount of Space Wolf in the process before trying to make his way back to Terra. And he unfortunately did not make it in time. And Horus knew if he had... if Russ had made it back, the fight would have been very different. But the heresy comes to the close with the death of Sanguinius at the hands of Horus, and the slaying, soul and all, of Horus by the Emperor, who also suffers a grievous wound that inters him upon the Golden Throne in perpetuity. So the Horus heresy had come to a close, and the galaxy was really in ruins. And after the heresy, Robert Guillemot of the Ultramarines set out the Codex Astartes. The goal here was to prevent another heresy from happening by limiting the amount of space marines that any one man could wield. And the legions were broken into chapters with 10 companies in each. So to kind of put this into perspective for you, the legions which would have numbered in the hundreds of thousands strong, were reduced down to 1,000 strong chapters. The Dark Angels actually used chapters already. The Space Wolves called their chapters great companies, so it's already a kind of pre-established way of doing things. But the legions fracturing into brand new chapters with different names, heraldry but staying true to the teachings of their parent legion and Primarch. This was called the Second Founding. The Ultramarines broke into a ton of other chapters, with the Ultramarines being their kind of home origin chapter, I guess you could call it. But the Second Founding almost resulted in another civil war.
Yeah, because Russ didn't like it.
I mean, a lot of the Primarchs weren't interested in dividing their Space Marine pizza into
Russ
any more
Roldorn,
slices than they
I mean.
already were. And this was especially true for Leman Russ and the Space Wolves. You can look at people like the Iron Hands or Corvus Corax of the Raven Guard. They were fine with it. Same thing with the Salamanders. They still had like about under 1,000 men anyway. So like, oh yeah, sure, we'll take your chapter thing and do it. Oh, there's not enough of us to make more chapters? Who would have thought? Like, it is more beneficial to the ones that suffered the most casualties, or the ones that really saw the way of things. So definitely, of course, Guillemot and Dorn were on the forefront of that. Actually, I think Dorn was against it. I can't remember.
Yeah, Dorn was against it.
We'll talk about
from what I remember.
Dorn and Guillemot now, won't we? Now, eventually, all the legions agreed, but each Primarch.
I thought it was that Dorn was the main guy that was against it, and that's why the Black Templars, like Sigismund, I think, broke off and started the Black Templars because they were super against it. But eventually, Dorn gave in because they didn't want to start again another second civil war after what had just happened. That's what I remember, but again, correct me if I'm wrong.
Kind of adhered to the tenets of the Codex Astartes in their own way. The Space Wolves were only divided once into the Wolf Brothers chapter, and the rest of the Legion remained intact. And Guillemot may or may not have fully agreed to this. Hint, he threw a temper tantrum, but Russ wasn't going to budge. And a lot of this can be attributed to some people believe the Canis Helix can only apply to people on Fenris. Anyone from a different, I think it's called a throne world, or a world that basically feeds into Space Marines. It won't. The Canis Helix will rebel against them, and the Gene Seal will actually kill the neophytes. So it's really hindered the Space Wolves' growth from this point on. And this meant that post Second Founding, the Space Wolves would be the largest chapter in the Imperium, retaining all 12 of their great companies. The 13th Great Company, that's where this comes in, was tasked by Leman Russ himself to go find Abaddon and kill him, bring his head back to present to the Emperor on his golden throne. Now there's another theory that they actually went about it on their own to go do this, but they followed what soon to become the Black Legion deep into the Eye of Terror, and they didn't surface for another 10,000 years. And of course, guys, you do have to know that everything in the Eye of Terror works at a much different rate of time.
Yes.
So 10,000 years might have only been 400 for them. Might have only been 100 for them. Might have only been 2.
Could have been a handful of years. Yeah.
And the 13th Great Legion, or Great Company, I'm sorry, doesn't surface all the way into the beginning of the 13th Black Crusade from Abaddon themselves, and that's when they kind of eventually establish contact. But I think that their history requires a video in and of itself, especially their organization. Everything kind of changes for them because they're not allowed to replenish their ranks or anything. So if you guys are interested in knowing more about the 13th Legion, let me know, and I'll definitely do a video on them alone. I think it's really cool. But the argument was made that the Space Wolves forces were really severely diminished by the time the Horus Heresy ended. And if you think about it, that's true, right? The Wheel of Fire campaign claimed what? Some 35,000 Marine lives. That's about a third of 100,000. That happened near the beginning of the Crusade. In addition, the Wolves confronted 2 other legions and put them to the sword by whatever means. So that had to be another couple of hundreds of thousands. By the time the Horus Heresy kicked off, they were probably at around 80 or 90% strength. Purely conjecture here. I'm just assuming that they would have wanted to replenish that. But during the events of Wolfsbane, Russ remarks that the Legion is down to around 40,000 strong, This is post Prospero burning and the Alexis Nebula. So
that's a big
there's
dip.
no saying exactly how many, but I'd suffice to say anywhere as low as 10,000 on the bottom end or as high as 30,000 on the top end are left by the time of the second founding. And I'll be honest with you, I think it's probably more in the 10,000.
I was gonna say it's
Wolf's
probably in the
Bane is a
lower end.
really interesting book, and it talks about how,
I mean, dealing with, you know, again, the Thousand Suns and then having to fight off the Alpha Legion, right? Like, they probably would have been hurting after that. Not to mention the numbers of a lot of the other legions from the drop site massacres, you know, they were even worse off. So, yeah, I would think probably, you know, the lower end is probably closer to what actually happened.
Essentially the wolves in all their anger throw themselves onto the swords of the Sons of Horus. So it's definitely a very crippling book if you're a Space Wolf fan. So take that as you will. So all that taken into consideration, the Space Wolves are not known for their willingness to adhere to anyone's rules but their own. And Russ kind of followed almost no rule set out by the Codex. Instead, he kind of instilled the same teachings that had been a part of the Legion for years. And as things kind of progress here, only a mere 2,000 years after the actual events of the Horus Heresy, we lose Leman Russ. Leman Russ disappears deep into the Eye of Terror. He's this big grand feast, this massive
Hello?
We lose Leman Russ. He's at this big, grand, massive feast, and he just disappears into the Eye of Terror. Essentially, he's standing there at the front of this feast, about to give some sort of massive toast, and his eyes just kind of glaze over, and it's as if he's stuck in a vision. And it pulls him away from the feast. He kind of tells his other wolf guard, like, hey, you're coming with me. Bjorn, the one-handed, you stay here, who is the youngest of his wolf guard. And he heads out on his ship, and he's not heard from ever again. And
Interesting.
He leaves this, not a memento, but a kind of a word of saying, like, I'm going to come back. Don't worry. I'll be there for the final battle of the wolf time, implying that kind of wolf time is the end times.
The Ragnarok.
For, Warhammer 40,000. But it spawns something. It spawns the Great Hunt. For 7 years, they wait for their liege lord to return. And when he doesn't, Bjorn, the one-handed, becomes the new wolf lord of the Space Wolves. And in doing so, he issues the first of the Great Hunts. And the Great Hunts are basically these massive, well, a hunt is a good word for it, but it's a massive kind of search party that's pioneered by the rest of the Space Wolves. Most of the other chapters have what they call a crusade. The Black Templars are always on crusade.
Right.
The Dark Angels will launch a crusade, or typically called a strike. Now, the Space Wolves have the Great Hunt, and it's typically charged at bringing things back into Imperial light, but it's initially started by one of the rune priests or wolf priests seeing a vision from Leman Russ themselves, guiding them to some sort of location. The first one, they were able to reclaim the armor of Russ at the Temple of Horus, and each one of these has done some sort of a massive victory, either for the Imperium or for the Space Wolves itself. They knocked out a massive Genestealer cult at Gehenna, and each one of these has done something to further something or another. Now, they have not, of course, found Leman Russ, and there have been a lot of conjecture as to where he is. Some say that he's actually leading the 13th Great Company from deep in the Eye of Terror, and he met up with them. So there's a lot of conjecture, and that, unfortunately,
I mean, that would make sense. And there's a lot of Primarchs out there that are doing things like that. Like, you know, Corvus, I think, is basically just wandering around Lorgar's tower, calling him a little bitch and telling him to come out and fight, right? So he's still in the warp. Russ, yeah, is in the warp doing something. You know, I mean, right now, in present time, 40K, Gilliman and the Lion are the only two Primarchs that are the loyalist Primarchs that are back, but it seems like they're probably going to be bringing more of them back, you know, etc. So Russ could easily come back again. Corvus could come back. You know, we could also see a lot more of the traitor Primarchs coming back, as you know, there's more going on with the Cicatrix Maledictum, right? The what the eye turned into, the giant rift that kind of cut the galaxy in half. So it wouldn't surprise me if you see Russ come back. It wouldn't surprise me if he's, you know, the next Primarch that would return. or Dorn, and along with each Primarch coming back, they also seem to be getting a gift from the Emperor. You know, Gilliman got his sword, Lionel Johnson got his shield. So, yeah.
The bow on the story of Leman Russ, easily one of my favorite Primarchs, because he was the very first Primarch that I ever learned about.
Yeah, the Space Wolves were one of the first chapters that I learned about, and I really liked them. And it's also just, as I've stated many times, you know, Greek, Roman, Norse, and Egyptian mythology is something I've always been fascinated in ever since I was a kid. You know, so anything to do with that stuff I'm going to be fascinated in. So the Space Wolves being essentially Viking Space Marines, I'm down with that. The Thousand Suns being, you know, Egyptian mythological, you know, Space Marines, I'm down with that. The Ultramarines being essentially Roman-esque, you know, Space Marines, I'm down with that kind of a thing, you know.
Space Wolves hold a very special place in my heart because they're the first 40,000 army I ever played. I played Bretonnians, and then
they were going to be the one that I was going to get first, and I learned more about the Grey Knights. And so I think the Grey Knights are going to, I already got some Grey Knight minis. I'm trying to learn how to paint, you know, some of those, but I'm probably going to get, you know, a full-on Grey Knight army as my first like actual army, and then go from there.
Loved Bretonnians so much that I wanted to play knights and with shields and shit in space, and I found the Space Wolves, and they have fucking, I love wolves. I was a kid, I had a triple wolf moon shirt. I still have that fucking shirt somewhere. And Space Wolves will always be, of course, they're like the gnarliest of bro chad, like, hey, let's just do a forearm handshake and like butt heads now, but they'll always have a very special place in my heart because they were a very different chapter that they were back in 6th edition that they are now. In 8th edition, there's a lot of grand sweeping wording that kind of surrounds them, and they've taken a lot more of like the native.
I think we're in like 10th edition now, so if this was 8th edition was when this came out, then yeah, I think we're on 10th edition, right? Is the current tabletop, so
I guess not native, but like actual Germanic wording for a lot of their stuff, like the what's it called, the Fenra, what I call it, the Wulka Fenrika is a recent thing. They weren't called that back in the 6th edition. And if you call Space Wolf a Space Wolf to their face in the Warhammer 40,000 world, they get pissed off at you. They
right.
The Wulka Fenrika, they're not Space Wolves.
It's kind of an insult to them.
The lore for the Space Wolves and for Leman Russ himself has definitely evolved over the years, and it's not over yet. We know that the Horse Heresy series has not ended, and we know that possibly with the rise of the Primarchs that we will get the return of Leman Russ in
more than likely
Warhammer 40,000, or maybe even 9th edition.
Well, he was saying 8th or 9th, where, like I said, I'm pretty sure we're on 10th and he's still not back. But I think, as I said before, all of the Primarchs returning eventually, I feel like is going to happen. And I mean, maybe they're starting to build towards a 40K end time scenario, or I don't know. It feels like they're eventually building towards the return of the Emperor, and what that is going to mean for 40K. Who knows? Maybe it is going to lead towards a 40K end time scenario, and they, you know, pull an Age of Sigmar in 40K and, you know, do like a reset. You know, I don't know. I don't feel like 40K necessarily needs to go that way right at the moment, but who knows what Game Workshop has got planned. But it seems like that's what they're building towards, is more the return of the Primarchs and eventually the return of the Emperor in some form. That's where I feel like it's going.
Rumor mill that was actually started not too long ago, I think in July of 2018, was that he would be coming back to the game as almost like an Odin-like character with missing an eye and having a raven that's supposed to represent the Emperor.
That'd be interesting.
But we don't know yet. And
that'd be interesting.
That the Russ himself has left a lasting legacy throughout the Space Wolves. And I talked about how the Space Wolves will always do what is perceived as right by the initial code set out by the Emperor, moreover than what is kind of the Imperium now. And there are a lot of instances. There are multiple battles of the Fang, in which case the Space Wolves get into altercations. Well, the first battle of the Fang is with the Thousand Suns, but there's one with the Inquisition at the behest of 3 other chapters of Space Marines who come to the Fang itself and pretty much lay siege and do an orbital blockade of it. And it wasn't for Bjorn Fellhand, who is now Bjorn one-handed and turned inside of a dreadnought after the first Great Hunt. The Space Wolves would have seen a lot more sanctions from the Inquisition. But you see that The Space Wolves are always trying to do what is right for the true Imperium. And we see that very commonly throughout a lot of the older legions. In the newer chapters,
But yeah, that would be interesting to see what Russ's take on the current Imperium is going to be like, right? Would he even stay loyal to it, etc.? You know, again, you know, even Gilliman doesn't like, you know, how the current Imperium is, knowing what the Emperor wanted or didn't want to have happen. You know, like, obviously they didn't have the full picture, but he knows the Emperor didn't consider himself a god and didn't want to be worshipped as one and have a religion built around him, you know? So, you know, and that again will be something that will be interesting. I've said this before in one of my, it might have even been in the Magnus video, but I wonder, right, like, has some of the Primarchs, the Loyalist and the Traitor Primarchs return? Are they going to shift some of those around some more? You know, are some of the Primarchs, when they return, are they going to stay loyal to the Imperium? Or are they going to break off and do their own thing? Will they succumb to chaos? Will some of them that have succumbed to chaos seek redemption and try to redeem themselves and maybe some of their legion and try to come back and be more loyal to the Imperium, etc.? You know what I mean? Like, are they going to shift those things around as well? You know, who knows?
they have a lot more different value systems and stuff like that. But the Space Wolves will always be traditional, will always be ritualistic, and will always be kind of tied around that things that made them who they were, as instilled by Leman Russ. Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video here today. Got a little bit more knowledge on our Primarch of Leman Russ. I'm sorry it took me so long to get this out, but I figured with Christmas, Leman Russ is the most Christmas-like of all the Primarchs.
I guess.
You put a beard in that motherfucker, he looks just like,
he
just looks like Santa.
Put a white beard on him, yeah, a little Santa cap.
Big ass things and like wolves and shit.
Got Frostmourne Santa.
Again, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video here today. Let me know which Primarch you'd like me to do next. I'm open to anything. I think one of the big ones everyone wants to hear about is Conrad Kurz, and I'm more than happy to talk about him. But do let me know in the comment section below. Don't forget to like, subscribe. I will be doing a lot more 40K videos here. I hope to do that one on the 13th Grade Company if you guys are interested in it. I've got another cool one in mind for the War Master, so do let me know if you want to see more 40K in the comments below. I'm more than happy to provide that for you guys. But as always, have a good one and take care.
All right, there we go. There we go. Great video by Italian Spartacus. That was Primarchs, Leman Russ Lore, Wolf King, Space Wolves, Warhammer 40K. Again, by the Italian Spartacus. Links, as always, will be down below in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Italian Spartacus' channel. So yeah, this is the first video I've checked out from him. Like I said, great video. Definitely much more of an overview of Russ, kind of going into, I guess, the more important bits of his lore, and, you know, again, his, you know, time on Fenris and how the Space Wolves kind of came to be, and the major bits of lore behind him. You know, obviously the burning of Prospero and that whole situation with the Thousand Suns was kind of like the major part during the Horus Heresy for the Space Wolves. But then also, you know, them potentially wiping out some of the other redacted Primarch legions, Primarchs and those legions that have been stricken from history in the Imperium, and them getting, you know, named the Imperial Executioners, etc. You know, good stuff. I lost my train of thought. I had something that I was gonna say, and then my mind just I had a brain fart and just went blank there. Normally these kind of videos I do with the Amber King, but the Amber King doesn't have a Leman Russ video out yet. So I was kind of hoping to find a video that would go a little bit more in detailed about specific things about Leman Russ, kind of how Amber King does it. But there also, just in general, aren't a lot of videos out there about Leman Russ himself. And I'm not trying to say that this is a bad video. This isn't what I'm saying at all. I actually quite enjoyed this video. But most of this stuff that I already kind of really knew, because again, the burning of Prospero, major event for the Space Wolves and Leman Russ, and what was I gonna say again? Well, I don't know, my brain's just not working right now. You know, the Prospero, all of that kind of stuff, and then yeah, them becoming the executioners by wiping out the Primarchs, all that stuff's, you know, information I already really know. I was hoping to try to find some more information that hadn't really known yet, but that's fine. Still a great video. Definitely got into some other tidbits of stuff that I didn't really necessarily know. I mean, it is again kind of hypocritical of them, you know, the Council of Nicaea, and like, we don't like psychers and the use of psychers, get rid of the psychers, yada yada, but yeah, we still use them, even though we don't really call them psychers, you know, that kind of a thing. So yeah, like I said, most of this information I already kind of really knew and went over, so I don't really know exactly what else to say here at the end to finish up the video, other than it was just, you know, a great video, kind of really condensing down a lot of the important bits of Leman Russ and the Space Wolves. I'm curious to know, again, this video I think was put out 7 years ago. Has there been more Space Wolf lore released since then? I think he was saying like 8th edition was the current edition at the time. I believe we're on 10th edition now. And you know, again, Russ still isn't back. You know, Lionel Johnson and Gilliman are the two Primarchs that are back, and I think supposedly a book that's coming out soon is going to be one that's going to go into them two actually meeting, so that would be very fascinating. But as I stated, you know, were Russ to return, would he want to take part in anything currently going on with the current Imperium? You know, because the Imperium in present 40k time is very different than what he knew and is used to, and it would be interesting to see also when he returns, right? Like, obviously, what was he doing in the warp? Is he going to return as more of this kind of, like he'd said in this video, this Odin-esque character with more knowledge, you know, and be, I guess, a little bit more matured? Did he get visions from the Emperor to go in there and do things? And were the visions that he was given to, you know, his men that went off on the great hunts, which that was fascinating. That's something I didn't know, were, you know, these great hunts that they go on, and how each one has led them to doing something beneficial for the Imperium, finding something, relics, artifacts, or stopping some kind of incursion of some sort, making a difference in the Imperium. That was pretty fascinating. I would like to learn more about those, which I would assume those are probably in more recent books, which I am still very far behind in the books. I'm only on the second book of the Horus Heresy still, so I've got a lot of reading still to do. But regardless, great video by Italian Spartacus. I'm gonna check out some more of the content on his channel, and please do me a favor, do so yourself. You know, like I said, links are down below in the description. Go over to his channel, like this video if you enjoyed it, check out his Patreon, check out his YouTube memberships, and any kind of sponsorship stuff you might have going on. If you enjoy his content and you want to give the man some extra love and support, you know, please go over there and do so. Yeah, you can do the same for my channel if you'd like. There's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I have to offer. There's a bunch of playlists on the channel for other universes I've done reactions to. Warhammer 40K, Warhammer Fantasy. There's a bunch of SCP stuff, Magnus Archives, etc. And we're continuing to grow with more stuff. There's also some gaming content on the channel, so plenty of stuff to look around and check out if you would like to. But yeah, regardless, thank you guys for coming in, checking out the video. I greatly appreciate it. If you enjoyed it with my commentary and reaction, consider leaving a like and a sub. It helps me and the channel grow. And yeah, I just appreciate you watching. If you are still here at the very end, it means a lot. I greatly appreciate all the support, and we'll see you guys on the next one. Have yourselves a wonderful day.